My presentation deals with Brimbank and Melbourne's West, but I'm going to expand the brief and talk about Melbourne. If I was in your positions, I would say, is Melbourne a good place to park my money for the next 10 years? Is the West a good place to park my money for the next 10 years? Is Brimbank? And that's why I think a developer, an investor, would look at this. And I will say that I think unequivocally Melbourne is a good place to invest over the next 10 years. Over the last decade, Melbourne has added more people than Sydney. Sydney either stuffed it up 10 years ago or Melbourne got it right about 10 years ago because we have added more people. Where did we add more people? We added more people in the West and in the North. And the reason why we did that is because of the affordability factor and the delivery of infrastructure. And those fundamentals that have given Melbourne an advantage over Sydney since the Olympics is not something that's going to be changed with a new administration. Those basics are going to be there for another 10 years or so. And then, of course, Sunshine and Brimbank sitting right slap bang in the middle of Melbourne's West. Let's start by looking at some of the big picture numbers. City of Brimbank, about 200,000 people. It's a Hobart, effectively. The number of people in Hobart would fit pretty comfortably into the city of Brimbank, growing about 1.1% per year. It's about 2,000 people. You'd probably have, I don't know, 1,500 new dwellings, new households that would be formed every 12 months simply as a consequence of population growth. In comparison with the Australian average, you would have to say, if you wanted to look at multicultural, ethnic Australia in its purest form, what places on the Australian continent would you go to? You would go to Cabramatta, you would go to Harris Park in Sydney, and you would go to Sunshine in Melbourne's West. I think this gives Melbourne's West and Sunshine a unique character. It gives it an eclecticism, a cosmopolitanism that Melbourne of the 21st century embraces and celebrates. Melbourne of the 1950s might have eschewed the West, and I think they did. Melbourne of the 21st century embraces that global culture, if you like. Maybe you could trace it back to a cultural cringe, but we like the ethnic influences, the colour and movement of Melbourne. And where do you get it? You get it in its largest concentrations in Melbourne's West. It's also a young community, of course, and it's young because it was ignored for the better part of 50 years. And in fact, anyone over the age of 45 in this room will know that Melbourne used to end at Deer Park. And of course, it's kicked on since then for 50 years or so. We have discovered Melbourne's West. I think the unlocking key piece of infrastructure was the Western Ring Road, completed about 1996. And it completely opened Melburnians' eyes to the West. I can remember about 1997 up Collins Street and jumped in a taxi to go to the airport and usually go out Tullamarine Freeway. This taxi driver went across the bridge. I thought I was being abducted. And he said, oh no, this is a better way. It's longer, but it's quicker. Went around the Western Ring Road. And all of a sudden, I saw Melbourne from a different perspective. And I think Melburnians saw Melbourne from a different perspective. I think the same logic applied with the Balti Bridge. All of a sudden, we have a perspective, an elevated perspective of our skyline that we never saw previously. And I think that piece of infrastructure changed Melburnians' perception of living in the inner city. I think the Western Ring Road has changed Melburnians' perception of what it is that's lying out in the West. It is also a family community. House and land packages, mum, dad and the kids basically, although that is changing. And I think there is a requirement for more diversity, a greater eclecticism, if you like, and particularly in the town centres out in the West. Let's have a look at some of the demographics of the city of Brimbank. Remember, 200,000 people. What is the top 10 non-Australian born tribes? This is a standard analysis that I do wherever I speak across Australia, and this is the first time I've seen this collection of non-Australian born tribes. The largest non-Australian born tribe living in the West is in fact the Vietnamese. Almost 20,000 out of 200,000, was that 10% of the population, was born in Vietnam. If you add in Vietnamese heritage, whatever, 15%. India, 8,000. Malta, Philippines, of course. If I do that at a national level, at a Melbourne level, Sydney level, a Perth level, I was in Perth yesterday, Then it's always the UK, then it's New Zealand, then it's India and China, and other bits and pieces. This is a different community. This is an eclectic, edgy community, culturally, if you like. And I think that gives it a vibrancy and excitement. You could also argue that it gives this community a determination to make a success in the New World. If there's one thing the Mediterraneans taught us, the Greeks, the Italians in the 1950s, was that they worked damn hard in Melbourne in the 60s, 70s and 80s in order to vindicate their decision to come to the New World. Why will not the Vietnamese? Why will not the Indians, the Maltese, the Filipinos do exactly the same? Where would that energy be focused? What community would be changed most profoundly as a consequence? Sunshine. And this thing about demographics, reading the demographics and letting go of what you might have thought about Melbourne's West and thinking forward from 2013 to 2033. I'm looking for a place to park my money between, say, 2015 to 2025. Where are we going to see a change in value? How will this part of the Melbourne metropolitan area be viewed differently? Is it going to be Toorak? Or is it going to be somewhere like Sunshine? I think Toorak's going to be pretty much Toorak for another 50 years or so. But Sunshine is going to be different. And it is business acumen to say, here is how it will be different. And here is the product that you should be pitching into the market between 2015 and 2025 or 2020 in order to meet the aspirations of the local population. If you look at what's growing most rapidly over the last 5 years, or from the census, then extraordinary growth in the Indian population. That's concurrent with national trends, and should be the Chinese as well. In fact, the Chinese are not even on this slide. The Filipinos, actually, this was a surprise from the 2011 census. I expected to see the Indians, the Chinese. The Filipinos, absolutely booming. People have told me that's largely as a consequence of the 457 visa program. But again, our cities are changing quite dramatically and giving the Brimbank an eclecticism that you see rarely elsewhere across the Australian continent, and certainly not 12 to 15 kilometres from the CBD, in an area well served by infrastructure, electrified railway line, now have the Western Ring Road, the Deer Park bypass. I mean, there are other parts of Australia that don't have anywhere near that level of basic infrastructure already in place. There are, of course, other tribes that I've written about in Australian demographics. You can't be in the business of demographics and not have cool acronyms like yuppies and dinks. So here's some of the coolest acronyms to describe the most recent tribes of Australia. The first one are the pumpkins, PUMCINS, and I suspect that everyone here is a bit of a pumpkin. It stands for the professional urban middle class in nice suburbs. You can tell pumpkin men on a weekend. They wear polo shirts, chinos and boat shoes. And you can tell if you come from a pumpkin household because there's goat's cheese in the fridge. I will argue that Melbourne has a goat's cheese curtain. It's about 5 kilometres out from the CBD and either inside or outside the goat's cheese curtain. I think, and I'll prove later in this presentation, that Melbourne's goat's cheese curtain is extending west. So again, the coolification, the cafe culture extending into Melbourne's west. Next one are the Nettles. This is the young power couple, 25 to 35, with kids under the age of 15, both partners working, household income of $150,000 or more per year, not enough time to enjoy life. I personally like the Kippers. These are the 20-somethings that live at home with mum and dad, kids in parents' pockets, eroding retirement savings. And of course, you can't be in the property development industry and not know the bananas build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. Again, some of the recent tribes of Australia. Let's have a look at Brimbank in a national context. Is this significant? Should you pick up and go somewhere else? Where am I going to get this level of growth and change and opportunity? Here are the top 10 fastest growing corridors on the Australian continent. It's not just a single municipality. If you bulk municipalities together, logically, where do you find most growth, most demand for retail sales or household formation, or new homes, house and land packages? Where should we go? Melbourne southwest. So Wyndham and Hobson's Bay adds 14,000 people per year, and in fact it outclasses the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast had this title through the 70s, 80s and 90s, and actually Wyndham and Hobson's Bay, largely Wyndham, has usurped the Gold Coast, largely because of housing affordability. Melbourne's north is doing well, 12,000. North Perth, in fact I was there just a few days ago, 11,000 people per year, nowhere near the infrastructure with the Mitchell Freeway north of Perth that we have into Melbourne's west, of course. Melbourne southeast, northwest Sydney, of course up Kellyville, Rouse Hill, and then Melbourne's west. If you just go directly west, Ballarat Road, you pick up Brimbank and then extend on into Melton. 7,500 people per year. It's not a bad effort. It's one of the fastest growing places on the Australian continent. 12 months ago, that's 7,000 to 8,000. Is this reliable? Is this just a one-off? Can I put my money here and be reasonably assured that that growth is going to continue into the future? Over the last 2 years, that would seem to be the case. And here's, if you look over 10 years, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people per year, expanding the market. Whatever you do with interest rates, whatever you do with planning, whatever, 6,000, 7,000 people per year need to live somewhere. They need a loan, they need retail goods and services, household formation. Whether you're any good at competing for that is your business. But I'll put you in the space, and this space is a good space to be in if you're in property development investment. The next chart, I like to look back over the last 10 years in order to see how a community has changed by age profile. This is the Brimbank community. Between 2001 and 2011 censuses, the community added 24,000 people, up to 191,000. And what this chart shows is the age profile shift over that time frame. An extra 1,000 kids, the baby blip, the baby bonus, 3-bedroom brick veneers, childcare, Johnson & Johnson should have prospered. And despite the fact that you added 24,000 people over the last decade, the kid population actually reduced. It's a quirk of the demographics, if you like, just the cohort shift, if you like. You're out there with your money on the ground and the kid population ain't growing. I'd want to know about that. And then the 20-somethings absolutely exploded out west. Cafes, bars, restaurants, student accommodation. You should have built student accommodation out in the west in 2002. Or house and land packages. And that's probably the story of property development. And then, of course, you've got the baby boomers up in their 50s and 60s. This is where you have the 50-something parents with their kids living at home, the whole McMansion thing. You've got your 23 and 25-year-old son or daughter living at home with their partners. You need an extended house, if you like. So house and land packages, childcare, and extended houses, house extensions, probably. Over the next 10 years, Brimbank's going to add 19,000. 24 in the last 10, let's say 20 in the next 10. I see that as pretty well much of a muchness. So the rate of growth I don't think is going to change that much. But if you look at the demographics, the real growth is in the kid population, primary school, junior secondary school. These kids want a backyard. They want sporting grounds, sporting facilities. In business, it's about getting the right product, the right time, in the right location. This says Brimbank, over the next 10 years, 5 to 15. Now, I don't know what that product is. That comes down to business acumen. I can sort of hint around it in terms of backyards and so forth. The 20-something population will actually contract over that time frame. And the reason is the 20-somethings that went there for cheap house and land packages, or that were living there with mum and dad, have either left the region or in fact they've aged in situ and now turn up in their 30s. What do people want in their 30s? Affordable housing, household formation, white goods, housing loans, if you like. And then the baby boomers moving from their 50s and 60s to late 60s and early 70s. And this is all about downshifting. So you sell your house and that's in a rambling McMansion, and you buy a unit, an apartment in the vicinity, if you like. This logic, I might add, applies in many suburbs across Melbourne and indeed Australia. The major thrust of the next 10 years will be 60-something baby boomers and their 30-something kids. Over the last 10 years, it's been 50-something baby boomers socking away their superannuation and their 20-something kids going to university or forming households. So it's as simple as that. Let's have a look at some of the colour and movement in Melbourne's West in Brimbank. There was a question you were asked on the census, did you volunteer over the last 12 months? 20% of the Australian population said they volunteered, or 19%. But if you were in Keilor, that proportion was 17%, and in Brimbank it ranges down to Albion at 11%, or Kings Park in fact. And I find this right throughout Australia, that working communities, migrant communities, are either less inclined to volunteer, or where they help each other in a tribal sense, they don't actually see that as volunteering. So I think that's more, in fact the equivalent area in Sydney, which has 8% to Kings Park, is Cabramatta. And that's clearly a Vietnamese stronghold. The other one I particularly like from the census is, always like the left field demographics, do you believe in God? 75% of the population said they believed in God as a Catholic, Presbyterian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever it is. 25% that said they were atheist. If you go to Keilor Lodge in Brimbank, extraordinarily devout community out there, 91% are believers. But if you go to Brooklyn, down south of Brimbank, that proportion is only 79%. It's the most godless community in Brimbank. Clearly, the road that links Brooklyn with Keilor Lodge, I think you jump on the Western Ring Road and travel north. As you travel north, that is Brimbank's own road to Damascus. You find salvation as you move to the north. My overall observation about this is a very devout community, very focused, very devout, very traditional values, traditional thinking. I think traditional marketing, traditional product, family, tribe, these are the sort of things that I think would connect with people in the West. And then, of course, degrees of education, and do have a bachelor's degree or higher. Australian average is 15%. It reaches a peak in the new suburb of Derrimut in Brimbank's west. In fact, just before you get to Caroline Springs at 17%. And again, that Kings Park, which I would say is highly devout migrant communities, don't have those formal education. But I don't believe that did not stop the Greeks, the Italians. You just have to look at the way in which they worked their butts off in the 50s, 60s and 70s. They were always going to be a success. And I think there was an opportunity in the 50s, 60s and 70s to sell aspirational housing to Mediterraneans. By the 80s and 90s, those Mediterranean values were starting to impact on property. Then there was a design shift in the 1990s where if you put on a house extension, it was done in that minimalist style. It's very Milan-esque when you think about it. I think that if you pump enough Mediterraneans into an Anglo base for 30 years, after 30 years, we start to, as a community, drink coffee, olive oil, cappuccino. Men and women will kiss each other on the cheek. It's a continental affectation that we have absorbed. What will Brimbank look like in the 2020s as this fusion culture emerges? And of course the opportunity in business is to actually read those trends and to deliver a product into that aspirational market. The next chart, I wanted to look at how dwelling structures have changed. Brimbank, 193,000 people, 2,000 people in 2001, 62,000 houses, dwellings, apartments, units, flats. So 191,000 people fit into 62,000 dwellings, about 3 per person. In fact, over the previous 10 years, the number of dwellings had increased by 10,000. And in fact, if you look at the preference, the net change has been greatest in separate houses on separate blocks of land. So 70% of net additional dwellings in the first decade of the 21st century in Brimbank, the traditional separate house and land package, which goes to my argument about these being traditional people, traditional values out there. The other thing you can do is to look at household type. 62,000 dwellings, 62,000 households. And if you look at the predominant household type at the 2011 census, well, a quarter of households are families, mum, dad and kids, the traditional nuclear family, living in a separate house in a separate block of land. It sort of makes sense. Couples of 13,000 and singles 11,000, but if you look over the last decade, in fact, the number of households has increased, couple households increased by 3,000. So I think these are the young singles or couples, the dinks, double incomes, no kids. Or it might be mum and dad, where the kidders have left home, saw that trend. So you've got those two things happening out there. And the rise of the singles. The family proposition has actually contracted over that decade. So I'd be looking at single product, couple product, older people, the downsizing market, the 20-something market. These are the things that I think are shaping on the ground the city of Brimbank. The other thing I am particularly interested in, I actually talk about this also in Sydney's West. It's also true of Melbourne's West. This chart shows income levels. And this is households earning more than 200,000 per year back in 2011. So deep green means really, really rich, basically. And no surprises, the inner east and right down Bayside, love that, all the way down to Beaumaris. And then out the Yarra Valley, of course. And Brimbank in the west is sort of the lightest of the light. But if you look at the little bit right to the top, up around Keilor North, my argument is they're saying that Melbourne's West is going to have 1.1 million people. I don't believe you can have 1.1 million people in any geography on the Australian continent and not have a Toorak or a variation thereof. It can't all just be affordable housing. Within that geography, there are going to be people who have a successful business in Sunshine, that have come up as a Vietnamese migrant from the age of 18, and they have a cultural allegiance to the West. Whereas an aspirational house on the West Side that is within 15 minutes of my business, whether it's a factory, whether it's a shop, whether it's an accounting firm or whatever. And it would seem to be emerging up north. And there's also a belt emerging just west of Brimbank, I think that's probably Caroline Springs or a little north. I'd be looking to nick that into Brimbank. So, it's a diversity of housing, styles and price points. Yep, the overwhelming market is affordable, and we understand that. But I don't think we should underestimate that if Brimbank and the West is to transition like this, then there will be a market for a Toorak. Okay, it's not going to be a Toorak, but you know what I mean, sort of up the scale. And it needs to reflect the traditional values, the cosmopolitan values and lifestyles of the West. It's not particularly good, this map showing the infrastructure of Melbourne's West. It probably really should be lined up with the infrastructure of North Perth or Sydney's West, if you like. And certainly electrified railway line straight through Brimbank to the west is an extraordinary advantage. Plus the Western Ring Road absolutely transformed Melbourne and unquestionably transformed the western suburbs and Brimbank and others probably were included in 1996. And of course there are plans for an outer metropolitan ring road. The east-west link, of course, I think is critical. I would argue at a strategic planning level, I think the biggest thing that Melbourne needs is to better connect the west into the central city, whether that's a duplication of the Westgate Freeway or a West Link, which is what is being expanded in the second stage of the East-West Link. So to me, that's, we as Victorians are better at investing in transportation infrastructure, in my view, than any other capital city in Australia. We don't think that, but go and live in Sydney's West or in southern suburbs of Brisbane or northern suburbs of Perth and you'll come to that conclusion. Just some bits and pieces. This is the age profile of the working population living in Brimbank. And you can see that people go to work from 30 through to about 55. And here is the total population. And the interesting thing here was the vast pool of people in their 20s, just relying on a single income, effectively. And I'd say, I would be like a rifle shot. What is the best practice affordable house product that I can pitch into that market. And when you're canvassing best practice, don't bother going to Sydney, don't go anywhere else. You will find the best practice in Melbourne. And nick each other's ideas and improve on them is the idea. The next chart, again from the census, is the employment centres, if you like, in Melbourne's West, 6 municipalities. And Sunshine CBD, okay, I've changed it a little bit because I've rammed together Sunshine, Sunshine West and Sunshine North, around about 16,000 jobs in that thing. But there is no other collection, geography, that would have as many jobs in a single location. And the other point is that it's all accessed by an electrified railway line. 2 stops effectively give you access to this extended CBD, if you like. So it's quite powerful. It's geographically central, if you like. Not only is it geographically central, but you've got Melton sitting on your outboard side. It's going to add 70,000 people over the next decade, and another 20,000 within the municipality. So those geographic considerations, I think, augur well for Brimbank and for Sunshine as a CBD. The next chart, again, I love this sort of stuff. This is the number of people with a job in Brimbank. So these are workers who work in Brimbank. So you might live outside Brimbank, you might live in Brimbank, but you've got a job in Brimbank. In 2006, 43,000. What is the Melbourne CBD? It's around about 250,000. Sydney CBD is about 330,000. I don't think they're going to be threatened for a while yet by Brimbank. However, 2011, it's 48. So jobs in this area are increasing at a rate of 1,000 per year, you would say, broadly speaking. That's not bad. I'd like to see it double that. In fact, I'd like to actually change the whole dynamic of Melbourne's West. In fact, if you go to Brimbank residents who are workers in 2006, it's 58,000. So 43,000 jobs for 58,000 resident workers means 15,000 people are travelling out to somewhere else, probably the CBD, because the infrastructure is so good. Then, of course, 2011, 62,000 workers with a job living in Brimbank. And what was the figure? 48? So it's 14,000 people leaving. 15,000, now 14,000. So it's slowly getting there. But again, I think there is an opportunity to take it to another level. Just a couple more slides. I particularly like this slide because it shows the change over time. This is the Brimbank resident workforce. The number of people with a job in Brimbank in 2001 and 2006. You know, the 5 years that crossed the boom, if you like. And it shows where job growth, people who were living in Brimbank and what their occupation was. And over that 5-year period, manufacturing, people lost their jobs in manufacturing, without question. In fact, this is replicated right across Australia. But Brimbank residents picked up work in healthcare, transport, accommodation, food. You add up all the positives, completely offset the negatives. There would be a good business in Brimbank about retraining, reskilling, relocating. Yep, you lost your job as a sheet metal worker, then you need to be retrained into that space. That's 2001 to 2006. Here's 2006 to 2011, which straddles the GFC. So manufacturing, I think, yeah, it's still shedding, but you can see it. There's a transition phase that's taking place in the first decade of the 21st century. And that wave of globalisation, all those jobs that are now in Guangzhou, I think the worst of it was probably in the first 5 years of the 21st century. But healthcare, what's the sort of space you need to be in the West, in Brimbank? It's something to do with healthcare. I don't know what it is, whether it's a surgery, whether it's a hospital, whether it's, I don't know what it is. That's business acumen. Transportation, warehousing, accommodation and food. You can do exactly the same analysis looking at the occupational structure of the workforce in Brimbank. Between 2001 and 2006, in fact, the negatives there, this is occupations. Machinery operators and drivers associated with manufacturing, don't need them anymore. And we don't need technicians and trades workers, but we do need professionals community and personal service workers, where do they work? They actually work in the CBD. Would they have an impact on the culture of CBD? The whole goat's cheesification, if you like, of the inner eastern suburbs now being replicated and given a Brimbank spin in the west. And I think that's very definitely the case. I want to talk about metropolitan planning and then come back to the goat's cheese curtain in the west. I know there's been a new metropolitan plan, and I've seen it, and I think it's extremely colourful, and I think it's very interesting. And it's, it's broadly in the right direction. Here is how I think Melbourne will look at 7 million people in the middle of the century. I think this is how Sydney will look at 7 million people in 2060. I think it's how Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast will look at about 5 million people, and Perth. The one thing you can say about the next 50 years is that petrol will not remain at $1.30 a litre. If petrol goes to $2 a litre or $10 a litre in today's terms, what happens to Melbourne? Melbourne's entire logic breaks down. If suburban workers cannot get to a city job, then city jobs must go to suburban workers. And so this presents a view of Melbourne. Now you've got the 10k radius in the city, dominated by singles, couples, dinks, gays, corporates, expats, and assorted rich people. Inside the goat's cheese curtains, the Manhattanification, if you like, that you can see everywhere around here. And then you have a radial railway network and a circular linked road. East Link, Northern Metropolitan, West Link. Have a look at Sydney, M7, M5. Have a look at Brisbane, Logan Motorway, which is a circular. Have a look at Paris. The Boulevard Périphérique defines the goat's cheese curtain. In fact, Parisians will say, do you live inside the Périphérique or do you live outside the Périphérique? But again, my view is that so you have that dense inner core. We have the global jobs, investment fund managers and accountants and lawyers and all that sort of thing. And then you have a series of self-contained regions, like Brimbank and Melton, like Hobson's Bay and Wyndham, like the northern beaches, like the northern suburbs of Perth, where people live, work, play, recreate, go to university, go to hospital, all within the local area. If you take city jobs from the CBD, seed them in sunshine, then it obviates the need for sunshine workers to come into the CBD. You don't need a second crossing of the Yarra. What does it cost to replicate the Westgate Bridge? I have no idea. It's got to be 10 billion plus. But if we take jobs and seed them out in key centres that on a blueprint from the Metropolitan Plan, one of which would be Sunshine, Box Hill, wherever it is, then you reduce your carbon footprint, improve the quality of life, and it feeds the type of jobs we'll be generating in the future. City jobs, CBD jobs, officey jobs, all those jobs that naturally flow in and around the CBD. The other point that's been made is the cost of housing. And here is the median house prices. It's sort of stuff that you already know, I would imagine, that in Sunshine you can get houses, housing loan packages, 400,000 up to 500,000, 700, 570 in the Toorak of Brimbank up north. Housing loan packages in Melton, way out west, extraordinary. You can get a housing loan package with a 2 in front of it. I actually often cite that in Sydney, and there's sort of audible gasps from the audience. But again, where else on the Australian continent can you get that level of affordability 12 kilometres from the CBD, where you have the second largest concentration of jobs on the Australian continent? You can't. So that to me is like, it's a fundamentally strong proposition. The only thing that I don't know is what is the product? Is it affordable housing? Is it apartment product? Is it units? That's where business acumen in property investment comes in. I want to have a look at something a little left field now and look at the best restaurants in Melbourne as an indication of fashionable Melbourne, if you like. And in 1999, this is the Age Good Food Guide. I write for the Australian News Limited, which is the dark side, but I have relied upon the Age Good Food Guide. And in 1999, there was one restaurant in that guide in Melbourne's west, and it was called Plume at Melbourne. I have no idea whether it's still there, but I reckon if you live inside the goat's cheese curtain and you work in the west, you would have been there. Here is the situation at 2014. And in fact, it's 7. And in fact, I argue that there's a line, and I think it's the latte line, the goat's cheese curtain, that takes in Ascot Vale and Footscray and Yarraville and Seddon and down to Williamstown. The question is it moving west? Can you do that sort of inner city, urban, cool culture that Melbourne does so well in the east? Can you actually do it in the west? Can you do it in Brimbank? And a measure of this, I think, is in fact the Cheap Eats Guide. And it's sort of like a food culture that is evolving. So if you are sited in the cheap eats area, then in about 10 years' time you'll have the fine dining thing. And so in 1999, there are 21 cheap eats. And if you look at it by postcode density, then certainly Footscray and Moonee Ponds, and there was one out at Sunshine. I don't know what that was. I should actually have cited that. And there was also one out at Werribee. Here is the situation 14 years later. And that's my point. I actually see the goat's cheese curtain extending west along the railway corridor to Sunshine. I think this indicates a cultural shift in Melbourne and an embrace, if you like, of the eclecticism, the cosmopolitan excitement of Melbourne's west. Just some points that I wanted to finish up on is, and I think this applies to Brimbank, I think it applies to Melbourne and many areas. Everyone says, which industry? Is it going to be agribusiness or is it going to be health or education? I actually would like to see Australians, Melbourne's West, Melburnians, Brimbankians, embrace a culture of entrepreneurialism. It strikes me that we have shifted to a culture where we are now risk averse. What we need to be is more risk inclined in the future. Otherwise, the entire country, the entire business community will end up stagnating, paralysed, if you like. If you accept a culture of have-a-goism, celebrating new businesses, I'd love to see City of Brimbank have a festival of entrepreneurialism and identify a young 28-year-old who starts a business as a builder, employs 3 people, lives locally. Fantastic. I want to celebrate and use people like that as a role model. At the end of the day, I want to see 1,000 small to medium enterprises evolve and put on 1 or 2 people. I think that changes the psychology of the community as well as changing business opportunity. The other point I would make is that I think we're on the right side of the curve. Interest rates are low, population levels are rising. After Kevin Rudd said, I believe in a big Australia, the anti-growth sphere forced a contraction in our rate of growth that is now pushing back, and Melbourne's rate of growth is in fact pushing up. We have a low dollar, which will improve tourism, and we're 5 years on from the GFC. The Great Depression did not last for 5 years. It's time to move on and to look to that next phase. There is no drought or other major natural disaster, and we now have political certainty. In my view, now is the time. Now is the time for Melbourne. I think it's the time for Australia. It is most certainly the time for Melbourne's West, and I would argue it's also the time for Brimbank. Thank you very much.